chamber, or they can use the remote raise hand function located on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. This will put you in the speaker queue accordingly. When subsequently invited to speak by myself, please then press your activation button in the bottom center of your screen. Please be patient and aware that there will be a small time lag and that you do not need to press the button again. The response of the system is not instant. If the button or desk microphone changes to red, then it has responded. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to address by myself, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. When invited to speak by myself, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and their camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this is not possible for any reason, please bring this to the attention of myself and or the Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Once you've participated, please remember to turn your activation button off as not to delay other participants from coming onto screen and to avoid any background noise or feedback when others are speaking. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and or to grab the attention of myself or the Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let myself or the Democratic Services Officer know. If a remote committee member has a prejudicial interest and is therefore required to withdraw from the meeting, the Democratic Services Officer will place that participant in the virtual waiting room until such time that the interested item has concluded. Please do not close your browser whilst in the waiting room, as the Democratic Services Officer will bring you back into the meeting automatically when appropriate. For members attending the meeting in person, they will be asked to leave the chamber for the duration of the interested item, and they will be invited back into the room as appropriate. If an electronic vote is called during the course of the meeting, then advice on how to participate will be given accordingly to committee members with voting rights at that time. If the Welsh language is spoken during the meeting, then a simultaneous translation will be available to listen to for meeting participants in that council chamber, and a translation receiver and headset are available at each seat for your use at the appropriate time. For remote meeting participants, a language selection is available under the Audio Settings tab on the left-hand side of your screen. The translation will also be audible on the live stream for the meeting for any persons who are observing only. Okay, so if we move now into part one of our agenda, and that's apologies for absence. I've had one apology from Councillor Hanks. Mark, do we have any other apologies?
Not at this time, Chair. Councillor Franks is hoping to join, but obviously if he can't, then he'll forward his apologies. Thanks, Chair.
That's great. Thank you. We'll move on to item 2 then, which is declarations of interests and nature of such interests. Do we have any of those, please, from anybody? No? Okay. That's great then. So we'll move swiftly on to...
Sorry, Chair, just to add Councillor Hamilton as well for apologies.
Ah, right, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. So 2 apologies, Councillor Hanks and Councillor Hamilton. So we're moving on now to agenda item 3. This is the report of the Director of Corporate Resources. This is our Oracle Fusion implementation. It's a project that we asked as a committee for a lessons learned report, which we are now going to look at in detail. And we've got a number of officers with us tonight to help answer committee questions and also to take us through the report. So am I handing over to Matt Baumer now or Tom?
It'll be Matt, Chair.
Matt, excellent. Thank you, Matt. It's over to you.
Evening, everybody. We've got a presentation that we're going to use to introduce the report. I'll just wait for that to be shared. Thank you. As per the request on the 20th of March, we've published some additional information in the report. The Part 1 and Part 2 reports are pretty much identical, and I believe we can have most of the discussion and questioning in Part 1 of the report session this evening. In Part 2 is the full contract, a summary of the key elements of the contract, and also some further detailed information on the consultancy costs that were incurred in delivering the Oracle Fusion solution. And apologies that was circulated very late this afternoon. So when we get into questioning, any questions on the body of the report are probably pretty much okay, Part 1. But if you need to get into any detail in those 3 Part 2 documents I've talked about, we would need to hold over those questions until we move to Part 2. As well as providing the contract and those further details, we've also taken the opportunity in republishing the Part 1 report to add in some further information, and that's in respect to the chronology of the project. So you'll recall from the 20th of March papers that we pretty much picked things up in April 22 when we'd had the reset of the project, but the paper now gives some chronology right from business case in August 2020. So the agenda or the running order of me just going through the paper is pretty much in the same structure as the paper itself. So I'll talk a little bit about the overrun and the additional costs that were incurred, the project chronology from business case right through to implementation, and then take you through the lessons learned process that we've gone through that's been extremely thorough, what the themes and findings were from that and the recommendations that have come out, and also the work that we're already doing on implementing those recommendations. But of course, this evening's session feeds into that process as well. So the next slide is the overview of the final position. So we had, it's fair to say, a very ambitious business case that was going to implement a very sophisticated system for £1.5 million. It has eventually come in at a touch over 5 million. It was, in my view, an unrealistic sum, £1.5 million, but certainly some of the additional time that we've taken to implement has had an impact on the cost. But it's worth mentioning the neighbouring council that have been in the news, a little bit bigger than that, larger than ourselves, but had a business case of £4.8 million to deliver Oracle Fusion, has come in at 10.7, and certainly not as a complete an implementation as the one that we've put in place here. So I do believe the initial business case somewhat was a little unrealistic. Needless to say, however, that we have kept members up to date and sought the appropriate approvals throughout the process to bring in the additional resources to bring the system to go live, and that's been through a series of emergency powers and a report to Cabinet as well, and the links to those are actually in your report. So I've got just 3 slides where I'll quickly run through the chronology and the running order, and these are relevant to the ultimate outcome of the implementation. And it goes back to 2020, August, when the business case was agreed to go with the Oracle Cloud Solution Fusion. It is worth recalling back then that we were in a little bit of a lull from the first lockdown of COVID, and very shortly in the autumn went back into a further one. So certainly it is fair to say that resources at the council were stretched, and what limited capacity there was already to deliver the project. We're doing a number of initiatives to support support the pandemic. The Oracle award was made in August 2020, and that was by way of a VEET notice. The the business case sought to have a successor to the existing Oracle system, but a cloud-based one. So there was no need to go out and tender for the solution. There was, however, a need to go out to tender for a system implementer, and that was undertaken in the September. And there were three companies who came forward at that time. There weren't in-person site visits, but there was a process of virtual site visits in a similar fashion to what you would have normally had for such a evaluation of an implementer. That virtual site visits and the evaluation process took place from September onwards, and the contract was eventually signed in the February of the following year, September 2021. Progress then through 2021 was limited in part because of the pandemic and capacity. And towards the end of 2021, there was a project reset. And as part of that reset, there was fresh project management brought in January 2022, and some general strengthening of project resource. There had been slippage due to the pandemic, as I've just said, and there was a refresh of the go live with an intention to hit an August go live. There were also some minor changes to the scope of the project at that time. The subsequent to further work and the volume of what needed to be done, the go live was set for November of 2022. During the spring and summer of 2022, it was quite clear that some of the groundwork necessary hadn't been done earlier in the project, and there were great challenges faced on data migration and payroll parallel running. And at that time, a real realisation of the level of additional support that was going to be necessary to be brought in to bring the project to go live. As well as bringing in that extra capacity, there was obviously a delay in the go live, which meant that we had to extend the contract for the existing EBS Oracle system. So that time, the go live was pushed out to November 2022. There was, over the following months, what we viewed as very good progress made to hit that November deadline, but we came up just short. The payroll parallel run thresholds weren't being met, and despite some push from the system implementer to ease on our thresholds, we stuck to our guns about the accuracy of the payroll information that we were working with, and certainly that holding the line there has had a positive impact when we've gone live, because certainly it's been a very positive go live with few issues. This did, however, create a real dilemma for us as a project, because the timescales to have a December go live were too tight, and similarly with January and trying to run payroll and the like after the Christmas break. We then also found ourselves running into some of the key finance timetable deadlines around closure of accounts, formulation of the budget, etc. So it's a very tough decision to be made, but the decision made was to actually go for an April go live. The go live consequently went live 2023. It's been a very clean go live, no significant issues. And it is that is something to applaud, because we do see continually across the piece the number of similar type complex financial system implementations that do have problems at go live. One of the reasons that this the lessons learned report is coming to at this relatively late juncture is the contractual dispute that we found ourselves in, and we needed to clear that post go live before entering or undertaking the lessons learned piece of work. I'm not able to say very much about that contractual dispute, other than to confirm that council reached a settlement, but I'm not able to say on what terms that was reached. So that's the background and some of the time. I'm just going to move on to the approach of the bulk of the report and the approach to looking at lessons learnt. We brought the retained project manager in to oversee the exercise, and that was supported by the use of some specific lessons learned software. There are a huge number of workshops across all the business owners and people involved in the project, and from that work emerged a set of key themes, and those are on the next slide, and these are the factors that we'll discuss in a bit more detail in a moment, but they're around the organisational capacity to run effective projects. They're about the project management methodologies that we use and the effective use of project tools. A critical issue was around testing infrastructure and testing capability. And then the fourth area is effective project team planning. There are in the report a number of, in the detailed report that's appended at the full lessons learned, there are a number of recommendations and conclusions. I'm just going to draw out on these slides, similar to the report, the key ones by theme. So against theme 1, organisational capacity to run projects, there were 5 lessons that were high priority recommendations. So firstly, and this is a fairly fundamental one to be honest, is actually organisational learning approach with lesson management system required. So this is about the exercise that you have being presented in front of you today, not being a one-off, but that actually about us being a learning organisation and continue to learn and share the impact of projects, both in terms of the good and the bad. Lesson 9 was around insufficient attention to quality and strategy documentation, and that's an area that does need tightening up. There were some concerns in the independent report about due diligence on the implementation partner. So it's really important to understand track record, skills and resources that the implementation partner brings in, and the importance of thorough site visits as part of that. The council's project management toolkit is generally fit for purpose, but it does need review and certainly needs a relaunch to sort of advertise its contents and the value it brings to projects. And as part of that, we need to review a consistent approach by ensuring that the project planning approach and templates are used consistently across the organisation. So that's all on theme 1. On theme 2, there were 6 key lessons. The project manager who came in at the reset followed a sort of industry standard methodology, but it didn't necessarily follow ours. And it's important that we have a methodology that's clearly set out in the toolkit and that it's followed in the way in which we deliver our projects. The project gateways are a really important element of project delivery, and it's felt that there wasn't sufficient control at the outset of this project. The lesson 21 is about risk management, and again, a lack of risk management approach at the start of the project. We've shared in part 2 the full contract as we committed to do. I'm not sure that there's much to be gleaned from it, and that does tie in with lesson 55, and the need to have a clear contractual scope of works in legal documents. 56, there's certainly some view that legal only really involved at the start of the finish of the project, and it's important that they're at key gateways and key points of the project. And certainly 59 carries on from that, and the need for really extensive input right at the start of a project. Penultimate slide. There's two themes covered on this that have less lessons and recommendations coming from them, but are certainly really important, specifically for this project and for more of your ICT-based projects. And the theme 3 is around testing infrastructure and capability, and there's two issues here. One is that the council needs to have testing capability and an infrastructure, so that actually it's the council setting the framework as to how testing should be undertaken. But then that in this instance, some of that the testing should have been against that framework by the implementer, and not for the council to do the detail of. So alongside that is the importance of having a testing strategy, management toolkit, and testing scripts repository. And finally, the fourth theme is about effective project team planning, and this is the importance of getting the right implementation partner on board, and the work of the project team. I think one of the key lessons for us is that you need the experienced project manager right at the inception of a project. We should have had a project manager who was there supporting us when we appointed the system implementer. Right, moving on to implementation of recommendations, and this is very much an ongoing and continuous piece of work. We have already shared the report with SLT and taken opportunities to feed it into live projects. But part of the implementation of the recommendations is bringing it here this evening and having your views for us to forward on to Cabinet. And then we'll take all of that together and have a joint session with SLT and heads of service to go through putting the action plan together, which is the final part of this. So that's all I'm going to say in introduction. I think we have done a very thorough piece of work with the lessons learned report, and obviously, as you'll see around the room, a number of colleagues here to support myself and Tom in answering any questions you might have.
Thanks very much for that, Matt. I appreciate the amount of work that you've put into this, and I think it needs to be clarified at this point that there may have been a number of hands that were involved in this, and they may not be with us anymore in the organisation. So really, that's the first thing that we need to clarify. It's a very comprehensive lessons learned report, as you said, and it brings to light quite a few, I think, probably shared issues across local authorities, and that is that definite lack of specialist resource, lack of project management, lack of procurement specialisms as well, because it doesn't really touch on the commissioning, and having those specialists there at the beginning to help you define the specification and include everything would have given them, I think, a better idea really, and to help you as well with working out an indicative value, because it's very clear from what we can see that there was no understanding at that stage of how much things would cost, because there was no real complete understanding of what was required to complete an implementation of a brand new Oracle. Okay, it was an Oracle system before, but a brand new cloud-based Oracle ERP system. So as you say, that there were lots and lots of things that could have gone better, and I really appreciate your honesty in this report. I know that committee have got lots and lots of further questions, so I don't want to take up too much time myself on this one, but I'll open it up to the floor ask committee members what they'd like to know more about. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Over to you.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair. Just give everybody a moment to wear their headphones. Is everybody ready? Thank you very much to Matt for the presentation today. It's very sobering. The best thing we can probably say here is we got there in the end. And that is a good thing. But after an overspend of 3.7 million in comparison to the original business case, this is also quite difficult reading. It's a report which is difficult to read as a member of a scrutiny committee, because seeing all of the details here raises so many questions about the processes in the council and how we got here. The chair there mentioned a lack of procurement expertise, and this is a clear point which arises from the fact that there was a lack of preparations for this. For me, the document and the lessons learned, of course, is important, but again, for me, it feels as though we're only starting halfway through the story. We have to accept, and I accept as a member of the committee, that the situation in 2020 was difficult for all. The timetable, Oracle said that they wouldn't be able to support anymore. The system that we had in place did leave us in a bit of a hole. And if it was the case that this happened at the beginning of 2020, and I take it this was before the lockdown, this did leave us in a tricky spot in terms of preparation and planning for putting a new system in place by the end of 2021. And I do accept that this is a problem. Where for me this is difficult is I think there was a lack of readiness to share information with councillors after this information came to light. As Matt mentioned, there were 2 periods where emergency powers had been used with not too much additional scrutiny. There was a report to Cabinet at the end of September 2022, and we asked, as a committee, we asked for an update as quickly as possible. But because of other things, this didn't happen until March last month because of the contractual dispute which was taking place. So that was 16 months after we asked for an update as councillors. So that information wasn't available, apart from the project going wrong. And with the increase in terms of costs, I want to know where we are going to go with this. In terms of lessons learned, it's come here because we asked for a report, but I would feel perhaps more happy to drive this on to Governance and Audit Committee afterwards, because that committee includes independent members outside of the council, and perhaps they may have different perspectives as well. I'm interested to know what Audit Wales's perspective is on this as external experts. Matt earlier mentioned similar things in a another authority. I don't know where they are in terms of doing thematic work on overspend or mismanagement of similar project, especially in ICT of this type. I've got a number of questions, but I don't want to hog all of the time, but I'm concerned about the internal risk assessments that we had. I'm concerned about the lack of scrutiny, which perhaps took place over COVID when things like this weren't going to committees, such as, well, I don't know. I don't know what happened in terms of SLT and why nobody flagged this as a spend, why nobody asked questions whether it was a positive or robust business plan and whether it was possible to fulfill this with the spend in place. I'm concerned about, or I'd like to know, whether the waterfall, us dealing with this, I'd like to know about our project management toolkit, where it mentions in lesson 52 that this is just needs review. If it's just needing review, is the problem that nobody paid attention to it in the first place? Is this what the problem was? And when we talk about the types of waterfall management, at the point of doing the reset, was there nobody still not looking at the work? Because when the project manager used different methodology to those that we developed, I know it's a while since I went on the Prince 2 training and so forth, but when somebody came in and used a different methodology to the one that we developed, this showed weaknesses to our management because they were looking at something different. I'm sure we'll discuss the settlement with the company under part 2. Obviously can't speak about this publicly, but I would like to understand more about this, what the matters in question were there. It's clear from the details that we have in this report that there were increasing costs after the reset and increasingly after the decision not to go live in November 22. All of these months or significant cost increases, we're talking about what, 100,000 of overspend every month, or more than that actually, 200,000 more than likely each month, if there was 1.4 million additional for those months. I understand the importance for high accuracy for this to go live, but the cost for this was 1.4 million. So how do we look at this as a spend or additional costs in comparison to the bugs in the system? Was this a good idea in your view as senior managers and senior officers in the council? And just a last point, if we earmark this as a project in future causing problems, how frequently will this happen, and what can we really do to prevent this from happening again? We heard about the Rookies program coming to an end. That was spoken about. I don't know if it was a governance and audit committee or if it was in the social care meeting. But if I see other ICT projects are underway, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Because spending more than 3 times the original sum raises concerns for me about how this went so wrong in the first place. I know that number are not with us anymore, and some of the senior officers with us today are not those who led at the time. But this is very difficult for me to read as a councillor, and it's very difficult for me. This is very difficult for the council to publish, and for us to say we did our very best with this, because an overspend of 3.7 million is a lot of public spending on something like this. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Before I hand back to, I'm not sure which officer would like to take on some of those questions. I think it was governance and audit we were at, where we talked about the WCCIS retender. I think it's been put onto our risk register, hasn't it? That is a national exercise, though, and the specification for it is being drawn up nationally. So that it's a slightly, I suppose, different situation. This was all an internal tendering exercise, wasn't it? Who can I then ask to answer some of these questions? Tom, yeah? That's lovely.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you, Tom.
indeed, Chair. Excuse me, and thank you, Councillor Johnson, for the questions. I'll start with some of the answers, and then I'll hand over to Matt and potentially bring in some other colleagues as well. And thank you for welcoming the report. And I'd like to say that it clearly is not easy reading for members, nor was it for officers putting it together, but we hope that it is an open and honest account of what happened through the course of the implementation and is designed to help us learn going forward. I think your suggestion, if obviously committee was supportive about referring the matter to Governance and Audit Committee, as well as your views back to Cabinet, would be something that that seems very, very sensible. As you say, they've got a different perspective and can consider it within the round of the overall control environment of the organisation. We have, in terms of your query around Audit Wales, we've been reporting this as part of the financial monitoring reports, and we discuss those on a regular basis with Audit Wales. I will, at our next liaison meeting, draw their particular attention and make sure they get a copy of the report separately, because we're about to start some work with them around financial sustainability, so looking at how we learn from projects like this as part of the overall delivery of public services. In terms of the question that you raised around the project management toolkit and the work that was undertaken at that kind of reset stage at the end of 21 and into early 2022, the Council's project management toolkit follows the same Prince 2 methodology that you referred to in terms of a waterfall approach to project management. So going step by step as you work through a project. I think the issue that that we encountered when the reset happened and we brought the new project manager in was the extent to which the project planning documentation had been completed. So there had always been a project plan in place, but it was the level and depth of the required tasks being identified and allocated to resourcing that felt as if that was the issue that project manager picked up very quickly, and the project sponsors required that individual to put in place a very detailed project plan, then allocating sufficient resource, and I think that illustrates, as you recounted from the report, exactly what happened at that stage. There was a more forensic look at exactly what was required, both in terms of activity and then in terms of resource to deliver that activity, and that realization that the level of that detail had not been where it needed to be at an earlier stage in the project, and therefore that's where we moved on from that. So the project management toolkit is currently being reviewed, and as Matt said in his introduction, is something that we're looking to make sure that we share very widely with colleagues across the organisation. And that's part of the purpose of taking this report to an extended leadership team meeting, so with all of our heads of service, to make sure that they're taking that learning on board. And we've already shared it, as Matt said, with existing digital projects which are currently being delivered by the digital service. So, and then finally, the question around the balance of risk of going live with a system that wasn't sufficiently robust and tested versus the additional overspend or the additional expenditure per month, that was absolutely within the forefront of the project team's minds, and that was the subject of significant discussion at senior leadership team. December and January were never seen as being feasible months to implement the system, and we were looking then at February and March because the system still had bugs in terms of the payroll data and that data not being accurate at that stage, or us not having the confidence in that part of the system at that stage, had to be weighed against the ability to then close the council statutory accounts, because that's the other major part of Oracle. So that was the dilemma in February and March, is whether we look to complicate the end of year process in terms of the finance versus making sure that the payroll data was sufficiently robust. And on balance, the decision that we took was that achieving a quality implementation that then led to no further issues following that go live was worth the additional overrun of those extra couple of months at that stage of the project in order to achieve the outcome. I don't know if, Matt, you want to add anything at that stage.
There was one thing I was going to actually add in the introduction, actually, and during that January, February, March period, there was a patch and upgrade required for the system, and the team did take the opportunity to undertake that, which would have otherwise been undertaken post go live and would have been a potential cost to the team. So there was relatively small in the scale of things, but there was some work done during that period as well on a system upgrade. But no, as we've said in the introduction, really difficult decision to make. But going live with this sort of system in February and March wasn't a risk I was comfortable in taking in terms of the council statutory accounts.
Thank you, Matt. Did you want to come back in on anything before I bring in Councillor Carroll? Councillor Johnson, are you, well, not satisfied, but at the moment, are you okay with those responses?
I'll allow others to ask their questions, and if I've got anything outstanding, I'll come back in later. If that's okay, Chair. Thank you.
Absolutely, as many times as you need to. Councillor Carroll, then I could see that you wanted to ask your questions. Do you want to come back in now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm stunned by this whole episode, to be honest with you. I think that looking at the authorities' attitude towards public money in this case, compared to what we're told when it comes to setting the council tax, for example, is completely different, because in the budget meeting a few weeks ago, I proposed a real terms freeze to council tax, which would have cost for the year £3.4 million. I accept that there are impacts on the base budget when you set the council tax, but the amount by which this project went over budget exceeded that amount. And there are lessons that need to be learned about this. Now, I accept what Matt said in his presentation, that the initial £1.5 million budgeted was almost certainly an unrealistic sum. But the question I then ask is, by setting an unrealistic budget at the outset, how much more was then wasted due to the costs of the project running over time? So my first question is quite a simple one. When the council first embarked on this project and procured the service, what assessments were made of its ability and capacity to deliver it?
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. Matt, Tom, I'm not sure who. Tom. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much indeed, Councillor Carroll, for the question in terms of the capacity and resources required to deliver the project. And I think that's one of the lessons that is drawn out in that, I think it's the third theme, isn't it, around making sure that we're understanding exactly what the requirements of implementing these kind of systems are. And I think it's clear from the report that in this case, there wasn't a sufficient appreciation at that early stage in terms of exactly what resources were required to be put in place. And that's what led then to that reset, as I was mentioning in response to Councillor Johnson's question, when we then did a much more thorough piece of planning in order to identify the resources that would be required to do that. So I know that doesn't give you a huge amount of detail, but the knowledge which is within the room this evening is largely based on that that phase of the reset onwards. But yes, that's one of the primary lessons that is learned, and goes back to the point that the chair made in her remarks immediately after Matt's presentation in terms of the specialist skill and knowledge that is needed at that procurement stage in order to understand what we need to implement systems such as this.
So, at the time, would you say this was typical of the council's procurement policy, in that would this have happened with other projects that may have gone ahead? I appreciate that you wouldn't necessarily be doing lots of things of this scale, but would you say that it was basically following a standard process?
I would say that, oh, sorry, the leaders indicated to speak. You should. Sorry. I would say that there's a standard process to follow, and the process in terms of procurement was followed in this instance. And you're right, Councillor Carroll, implementing systems of this scale is not something that, as a local authority, we do very often. Indeed, you know, it's I think it was about 14 years prior that the system was initially implemented. So the scale of it is very different. But going to the bones of the question in terms of would this have happened in other instances, I don't believe it would have done, because the issue here is an appreciation of the additional specialist skill and resource that is required. And in projects which are more business as usual, and that there is more of an internal expertise and specialism, I think you would see a different outcome.
But with respect, Tom, and I'm asking these questions because I want to get to the bottom of this and ensure that systems are improved moving forwards. This wouldn't be the only case where specialist expertise or skills were required. Now, I think it's almost certain, having undertaken a review, that lack of expertise at the outset is what caused this project to run over budget and caused the delays. But if the issue here was lack of expertise, surely there is a strong possibility that in other projects where expertise is required, the same problem could have occurred.
Theoretically, Councillor Carroll, yes, the same issue could have occurred. But I think the important thing to note is that at that reset, you had the involvement of two new project sponsors, complete refresh of the project team, and in terms of that transferring of the learning from this this particular project. That's the purpose of this lessons learned report, and also the fact that we have now looked to strengthen our processes in place. You'll be aware that we've strengthened the leadership team within corporate resources, bringing in some additional capacity and expertise at a senior level in terms of digital projects, and made sure that as a team, we've got some of those processes in place to recognise and learn from this exercise.
But when we look at the amount by which this project went over budget, we're talking £3.7 million there or thereabouts. And if, as there has been an admission, this could have occurred in other projects as well, even if the loss wasn't on that scale, and again, I accept that if it had been budgeted properly at the outset, it would have been in there for more than 1.5 million. But if this has happened in other instances as well, the total cost to the authority could be many more millions as a result of failures in procurement.
Is it okay if I come in here? Because, Councillor Carroll, while I completely understand where you're coming from, hypothetically, we're talking about other things that may or may not have happened. What we've got here is a very specialist cloud-based ERP system. And I know that this authority and others wouldn't have had the opportunity or the knowledge in the past to be able to implement such a system, because I wouldn't have seen it before. I think what we can take from this particular exercise and from the Lesson Learned project is that now, as Thomas just said, they've appointed a head of digital. And what was lacking in the commissioning of this was that expert IT systems manager's input, who would have had an understanding of everything that would have been required, and that would have helped to have supported the indicative value that they put on the total cost of doing this sort of exercise. In terms of the procurement as well, they now have an agreement, as we know, with Ardil. So their procurement exercises now and their guidance and the support from that collaborative arrangement will mean that they will have that too in place. So I think going forward, the authority is in a much better position than it was a couple of years ago. But yeah, this is a very specialist system, and I think that and others would be in exactly the same boat. Not defending that there was an overspend and this was not a happy outcome, apart from the fact they now have a really good system in place. But yeah. Do you have any other particular questions? Because I think we're not really going anywhere with the hypothetical stuff. But if you've got any others, please.
I mean, I accept that, Chair. The reason I raised this is because it's a question of procurement more generally, and this is an example, a bad one, of where procurement processes have failed, and it's resulted in the authority incurring a very significant cost. The reason I asked the question about other situations, hypothetical that they may be, is that if you look at the specialist expertise that the authority clearly lacked in this case, it is the reason why this loss occurred, because it didn't have the capacity to deliver the project which it had entered into a contract for. And so I do think it's important that we learn the lessons from that and ensure that the procurement process is reformed moving forward, so that we're not going to be delivering another cloud computing service in the foreseeable future, I would assume, because we've got the system in place now. But there will likely be many other examples of projects that need to be delivered that will require specialist expertise and capacity. I mean, I've talked about artificial intelligence before. The Council has accepted in previous exchanges that we've had that it doesn't have the sufficient capacity necessarily to deliver that, primarily because it's a new technology that's developing very quickly. So it's very likely that in the foreseeable future, the Council will be procuring other projects that require specialist expertise. And it's really important that we learn the lessons from this so that we get it right at the outset. We ensure that those projects are budgeted properly before we start the project. We have the capacity to see it through. And that's why changing the system and learning the lessons from where things went wrong in this case is so important. So I hope I've clarified my point there. I will leave the floor to others now because I think I've probably indulged the committee a fair amount. But that's why I raise this point. It is important to learn the lessons from this because we want to make sure this isn't repeated.
Absolutely, and I agree with you completely, and that's why I'm really happy that we now have that collaborative procurement arrangement with Ardell, because it means for any strategically important exercises going forward, we will have their support, and that's really important. I know that the leader wanted to say something earlier. Did you want to come in now before I bring Gemma or Councillor Lovelock-Edwards in? Leader?
No, I think if Gemma goes first, and I'll come in after her. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Gemma, over to you.
Thank you very much. And just to very briefly clarify, in terms of the concern about other overspends on projects, of course, this project had a dedicated cost centre to capture all the costs. It was flagged up as part of the council's revenue monitoring process. And of course, other projects of this scale would typically, not in terms of cloud computing, but would typically be reported as part of the capital monitoring process. So any overspends against projects and additional funding allocated to projects should be clear from the monitoring process. There will be, of course, not of this scale, but other cloud computing projects on the horizon for the council, because we have a number of other systems that potentially will need to move over to the cloud. So definitely opportunities for lessons to be learnt. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, you've got your hand up. Can you hear me?
Hi, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. If you press speak button now, you should be able to come through.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I just want to echo the comments that have already been said in terms of this report is more than sobering. I think it sets out a stark tale. And I think the key principle here is around learning lessons. So there's a couple of points that I want to raise around that. And the first one is, considering there are a number of different lessons to be learned and different priorities that the council should focus on, how is that going to take shape over what timeline? And how can we as a committee be engaged in that process to ensure that those lessons are being learned and that we are part of any review process around that? I also want to ask in terms of the system implementer, not sort of at 10.4.2, it says the system implementer did not draw the council's attention to the enormity of the council's exposure to risk. I assume it's risk, and that gives rise to me, following on from Matt's earlier comment where he alluded to another council. Now, a quick Google check will reference a number of councils, particularly in England, who have suffered or are suffering with similar issues. So my other question would be to ask, at any point did the system implementer or the owners of Oracle then sort of highlight similar themes or issues coming from other councils? Or did the council at any point think about reaching out to other councils who used Fusion to see if how their experience was, and to learn lessons at a much earlier stage, looking at how other councils have approached this system? And thirdly, we talk about sort of the in the executive summary that it's been 10 years or 10 years plus since we've had to look at changing the system, and taking into consideration what we are hearing today in terms of costs and lessons being learned. What is the lifespan of Oracle Fusion, and how confident are we, or what reassurances can we get that the system is fully operational and that it works in terms of providing the best service possible on all elements, taking into consideration the glitches that have been highlighted? Because I want to ensure that it's not just lessons learned, but it's fit for purpose going forward too. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. Some good questions there for you, Tom. Are you coming in? Yeah, great.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards. If I may, I'll take the first. I'll bring Tracy Dickinson in on the second of your questions, and then hand over to Matt for the third. In terms of the action plan to accompany the response to the lessons learned, our intention had been to develop it, to report it in parallel with your reference as a committee to Cabinet. Taking into consideration Councillor Johnson's suggestion earlier this evening about taking this report to Governance and Audit Committee, if members would be supportive, perhaps what we could do is look to report the action plan to Governance and Audit Committee for their views, informed by your discussion as members this evening, and then we'd be able to report that on to Cabinet for their consideration, so that they'd have the views of both your committee, the Governance and Audit Committee, and be able to then have a look at what we're proposing to do in terms of that action plan. So work has commenced on developing the actions in response to the report that you've got this evening. I want to provide some reassurance that that has already started. And I'll bring in Tracy now, if I may, Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, around the system implementer and Oracle, and reaching out to other organisations.
Thanks, Tom. So just in terms of the system implementer question, yes, we did reach out to a number of other councils, both in Wales and in England, in relation to this project and where they were with their projects and any learnings that we could glean, particularly from a system implementer perspective. And unfortunately, we weren't able to glean any gems, so to speak, in terms of what they'd learned from the project and how we could look at operating it differently, or making any changes or updates in terms of our systems. Our system itself had a number of significant advancements in comparison to their systems, and therefore we were kind of going it alone a little bit in terms of what we were looking at implementing from a both Oracle and MCR perspective. That said, we did and do continue to speak to all of the other local authorities from a payroll perspective, and are actually seen as a subject matter expert in this space currently, where a number of other local authorities are drawing on our experience and our lessons learned in terms of assistance with their projects. I think just in this case, it was really unfortunate that we were probably going earlier than a lot of others had done. We are very well aware that there were others that had implemented Oracle previous to us, but their systems weren't on a like-for-like basis. And despite us reaching out and having really good working relationships with those councils, we weren't able to glean anything that would have assisted us in this project, in this case. So I hope that helps. But we are still in contact with all of those local authorities and new ones. And in fact, we had an approach just this morning from another local authority on how we could assist them with their system implementation.
Just on a question of the longevity of the system and also assurances about its operation, the general direction of the industry is having systems as a service rather than you actually owning the asset and the financial system being on your own servers in-house. So by following this route, that is the best opportunity for the council to have a system with a long life. We do in the audit annual audit plan. We have a rolling programme of reviews of the controls and the operation of those controls for the various modules in the system, and they'll certainly feature on a regular basis for the first couple of years until the system's fully embedded. But certainly some of the early audit reports I've seen are very positive, including the most recent around the payroll element of the system. No concerns there.
Thank you, Matt, Tom, and Gemma, Tracy, for that. Councillor Lovelock-Edwards, do you want me to bring you back in, or are you happy with those responses? You're on mute. I think that meant she was okay. Anyway, can I bring the leader in now? I know she's been wanting to speak. Leader, do you want to come in?
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Chair. I think this has been a very helpful exercise. I was really pleased that Scrutiny wanted to do this as a lessons learned exercise, because there are lessons to be learned from this. One of the things that I feel is that we need to be mindful of the environment in which we work, and the environment in which we were working at the time that this was set up. I would say, and for those that were members at that time, that if we had come to scrutiny committees, etc., and said we need to do this work, and it's going to cost us £3.5 million, it would have been a very hard ask. When we have a situation where at the last minute in council setting the budget, we have unfunded demands for millions of pounds, which would mean that we couldn't deliver a balanced budget, then the types of conversations that sometimes go on in this chamber can be difficult. And I think on that point, we do need to be honest that sometimes maybe we haven't been realistic about the resource needs. There has been pushback when we've talked about improving or increasing project management resource. There has been pushback when we've talked about strengthening the senior leadership team to make sure that we have the correct level of expertise going forward. And I think that the appointments that we've made in both those areas have proved their worth. I think we need to recognise the world in which we live. If we have an agenda of increasing the digital performance of this council, then we need to be prepared to resource it. And we don't need to have discussions which are in effect a race to the bottom. We need to be realistic about the resource we need to deliver effectively for the people of the Vale. And I will continue to support that. I will also continue to support any steps that we can take to learn from this and to help other local authorities to learn from this work as well. I know our officers are working in Wales-wide networks, and I also talk to other leaders, and we will share our understanding there. But I would make a plea that we look at this in a constructive manner rather than a finger-pointing exercise. We need to get right down to the detail, and then from there we can learn going forward. I think it's also worth mentioning that, as Gemma did, that in terms of procurement, we have also strengthened that function as well through the Ardal arrangement, and going forward we also have that as well. So there are lessons to be learned. There are some lessons that are already being acted on, and we will continue to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Leader. Anybody else who would like to ask any questions? Councillor Haynes, please come in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the team for the report. And first off, I'd like to thank you all for the transparency in the report. It's very refreshing and helpful. But first off, the business case. I'm not going to go over what's been said by other councillors, but the business case, the fact it was that unrealistic is quite worrying, and I would have hoped that Cabinet would have picked that up. We hope in future the Cabinet will pick up if such things were put forward which were unrealistic. Now, I went through the report, and a couple of things have concerned me about it. The first of course, is this tendency to, we've got a problem, we don't have the skills, we'll employ a new member of staff. There are skills in this business. There's project management skills in this business. You rolled out a 20-mile-an-hour signage on time. If someone project managed that, those skill bases are here. We need to transfer them across the business and upskill where is needed. It was also mentioned that people didn't seem to understand the IT. Well, I find it hard to believe that the IT department, and having worked with IT departments, didn't jump up and say, there's a problem here. This would have been flagged a long time ago by these people. So, and moving on to the constructive part. Effective project team planning. Again, the idea that you just put a project manager in, it's not going to work. You've got to have a team structure where you pull people in from across the organisation with the skills, the knowledge, and they come in and out the project teams. And this is basic project management. The project manager you employed to do this should have told you this. So I will hope you'll take that on board. Now, organisation capacity to run effective projects. Now, in this section, I found a thing called capability maturity models. Now, I know what a capability maturity model is, and I suspect most people don't. I didn't think that we were going to create any software. This is particularly designed for software development. I can see why you're using it. It has been used before, or hope to use it. It has been used before in the development of projects in IT, particularly with government agencies. But it is not the best thing to transfer across the organisation. You will end up with a lot of tick boxes, which may seem appealing, but it won't make anyone use their brains when they're doing their job. People need to have autonomy to do their roles. You'd be far better off using quality management systems, which should already be in place in the organisation. So I urge you to relook at that section of the thing and get into it. So in brief, training, use the skills we have. We don't have to employ people, and listen to the ICT team when you have an ICT project. They have the skills, they have the knowledge. When the people I spoke to in it seem to be quite adept at their built job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Tom, would you like to come back on some of those comments made, please?
Yes, certainly, and thank you, Councillor Haynes, for the questions and the comments on the report as well. In terms of the project management question or suggestion that we have that capability within the organisation, absolutely, we do. In some instances, I think there is a degree of specialism required in that project management. And sometimes roles to roll out things like the 20-mile-an-hour limit can be transferred to being a project manager in delivering other projects, and that's a really important skill that we need to be capitalising on, isn't it? As we know, we're going to have to be delivering lots more change. And I think Councillor Johnston's remarks earlier about the project management toolkit and indeed Matt's introduction in the fact that we need to make sure that we're communicating that out to colleagues and making sure that we're training and equipping them with those kind of skills is a point really well made. I do think there's an occasion where bringing in some specialist skill and expertise in that project management field is important, and on a scale of project like this and its technical nature. I think that's the time to do it. But the general point that you're making around project management skill, I think, is a really important one, and perhaps one that we can strengthen in response to the report. Thank you for the comments about the council's IT and digital teams. I know that they'll appreciate hearing those, and I think this is where we've started to have some discussions now as a team within the Resources Directorate about how we make sure that there's lots of joined up thinking, discussion and project management right across the directorate, so that what you don't have is one part of the team doing something without hearing the voices of others. That's going to be something that will be increasingly an opportunity for us to do and to change. Matt mentioned software as a system rather than things being kept on premise and maintained in a more traditional application type environment by ICT people, and therefore we know that we need to change the way that our digital colleagues are liaising with other parts of the organisation, because actually it's a partnership between services and our digital team to support those services. So absolutely, I think that's a point well made. In terms of the capability management issue and the and whether we should be doing that or whether we should be looking at having quality management systems in place. And indeed, in lots of the council's departments, we do have those specific quality management systems. What if committee are happy, and Councillor Haynes, you're happy for us to do perhaps is we can go back and have a look at the language that's being used there, because I think whether it's quality management or capability management, the point is making sure that there's a proper framework in place to support the delivery of and testing of these kind of systems. And perhaps rather than us getting hung up on the particular words that we use or the term to describe it, what we need to do is make sure that the emphasis is on what it's intended to deliver as an outcome, perhaps.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Haynes, do you want to come back on any of those or have more questions? Because
not more questions. I'll just come in. Thank you, Tom. And
thank you.
The rather the QMS rather than the I hate you capability maturity model. The capability maturity model specifically will give you tick boxes. It is designed to give you tick boxes. So that's my concern. And while quality management will give you suggestions and movement. So that's specifically the point I was trying to get across there. And particularly with the ICT as well, moving on with that bit of clarity on that, is just to make everyone hear. You know, everyone uses the word cloud as if it's something scary and new. All it means is you're using a server in a remote location rather than one in your building. Yet at the moment the word cloud is used, everyone gets frightened and they don't engage their own brain, shall we say, and think they need to get a specialist in to explain what the word is. Just make a phone call, they'll explain it to you in the department, I'm sure. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Goodjohn.
Thank you, Chair. Now that Councillor Carroll is so passionate about procurement policy, I wish he'd have joined us on the procurement task and finish group. I think it's important to say there are lessons that have been learnt already to a large extent, although more can of course be implemented. There are mitigating factors, but there were still mistakes, and I'd like to know more about how those mistakes were made. Quickly to say though, the IT skills, a lack of expertise in the council is not anything new. We've seen this on a few different projects before, and so the new head of digital is a really important step towards that, although perhaps more training on IT literacy across the council might be something to consider in the future, such as when we have we're reviewing the whole thing anyway in the months upcoming, but perhaps that's a good idea. And additionally, also to do with procurement policy, since we're having a whole review, this is a good time to bring in those new lessons from the procurement process as well. It'd be really interesting to see. The one that I think hasn't been dealt with as much as the others, which was really interesting to me, was internal and external communication, which I've been seeing time and time again pop up as being an issue of people being unsure of what's going on, unsure of why things are happening, duplication of work. That would be really interesting to see what can we do to mitigate that in future, internally and externally with external organisations. Just to understand a little bit more about what was going on, I think it was lesson 36, was talking about stages of the implementation process, moving on before all the criteria, the exit gate was reached. So when was SLT made aware that this had occurred previously in the process? And do we know what kind of processes, what kind of mitigating factors were used to try and prevent that from being an issue later down the line? And additionally, when the issues regarding payroll and the transfer of data from payroll, when that was realised, when was that reported to SLT? Because that was a significant factor in the original pushback from September. So when were SLT made aware of that situation, and were the accounting team part of the process there in trying to understand exactly what would be the costs of that additional consultancy that would be necessary? And was there enough consideration in SLT if this was to go over budget again once it had happened the first major time in September? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. If I respond to the suggestion in terms of the procurement review and playing in the lessons learned, and this obviously picks up Councillor Carroll's point earlier around making sure that if there are similar exercises happening in the future, that we make sure that the lessons are learned. Certainly, and I'll make sure that I liaise with colleagues from Democratic Services who are supporting both that task and finish group, and also ask Matt if you can share the report with colleagues at Ardell to make sure that we bring that together. If I may, Councillor Goodjohn, I was going to defer to Nikki Johns, who's our head of digital, to give you an answer regarding the IT literacy piece, and then I'll bring Tracy and Matt in relating to those exit gates and specifically around the payroll parallel running, and Matt and Tracy can discuss those issues. So I'll hand over to Nikki, if I may.
So we have absolutely identified that the IT literacy of our organisation needs to be raised, and we're doing that at multiple levels. So we have a digital training consultant who's doing that on more of our end user computing. We've already started a series of lunch and learns across I think we've got 11 topics for our SLT and our heads of service, so that they can understand more of our technical concepts as we're going forward and start to understand how we apply those. With regards to the IT teams, we are going through a transition at this moment in time, I think, where a lot of the work that we've been doing and our skill sets have been very much focused on our infrastructure, and we have definitely recognised and identified the need to upskill our teams around business processes and how we support the data transfers and that move, because it's less, as Matt mentioned and Tom mentioned, with SaaS product, it's much less about our infrastructure and it's more about those processes, the data migration, and ensuring all of our integrations are in place.
Are you happy for me to come in terms of, okay, so just in terms of the exit gates, Councillor Goodjohn, I'll try and give a simplest answer as I can, whilst also ensuring that I can comprehensively answer the question, if that makes sense, because it's a contradiction in terms. So I'm sat next to our payroll manager, and she will know that throughout all of this stage, it was a really uncomfortable place to be. So we had a number of key gateways that we had to meet in terms of parallel running, and those gateways involved us attaining thresholds in terms of the requirements for the systems to push through to the next gateway. So these might not necessarily be exactly the correct numbers, but just to give an example, we may have had to have 90% compliance with from a payroll perspective in order to push through to the next gateway. At the same time, we were also identifying key issues or key problems that we were extrapolating from the system as we went through the testing process, and they were categorised essentially as showstoppers, so ones that we couldn't move forward with, and kind of category levels below that. And throughout that whole process time, we had a category 1 showstopper, which was the absence management that we've talked about in terms of the lessons learned, which was how our absence management was structured within that Oracle Fusion system. So we kept our SLT updated that we were pushing through the gateways outside of some of those thresholds. So we weren't meeting those thresholds, with the understanding that actually we may manage to achieve the closure of the absence management or the completion of the absence management, and then close those gateways in terms of the percentages, if that makes sense. As I say, that was a very uncomfortable place to be, because from a payroll perspective, there's a risk attached to pushing through gateways when you haven't quite met the criteria to move through. We always knew that there would come a point where we had to say, stop, we can no longer push through those gateways. Those issues have to be resolved and we can't go any further. And that was a really difficult time for both us as sponsors to manage, but also from an internal relationship to say, trust us. You know, we need to work through this. We need to work through it at a bit of an at-risk basis to see if we can meet the thresholds, but also the deadlines that we had, whilst managing risk appropriately through that stages. So I hope that gives a bit of an explanation. With the accounting team part of the process, yes, they absolutely were at that whole stage, and we had joint sponsors, which was myself and Matt. So I certainly would not have got away with not having the accountancy team and the accounting team as part of that process. So I hope that answers the question for you.
If I may, Chair, that's good to hear. Of course, pushing through the gateways was a risky move, but at least SLT was at all times consulted. The main alarm bells will have rung, I assume, in September when that first pushback occurred. I wonder, because there's also the lessons learned regarding legal, and having legal as always consulted as part of the process in case they need to get involved, to be aware of the situation when it's a high risk process. Do you think that, knowing that you were pushing through gateways quicker than necessary, knowing that you had a tight deadline coming, SLT being aware of eventually the payroll issues coming along the line as well, was there any consideration of bringing legal in earlier to be aware of the situation, and in case there needed to be intervention, such as with the product testing, or was that option not considered until September?
Are you happy for me to respond? Yeah. So the issues were emerging prior to September. So I don't want you to think that September was kind of, oh, you know, we're not going to hit it. We were evaluating, once we'd brought on the project reset, we were evaluating this project weekly. So that was the level of scrutiny we were given to this project, and sometimes at times daily. You know, it became everything we lived and breathed for quite a significant period of time. Were legal brought on board during those discussions? I couldn't hand on heart tell you exactly when, but yes, we did have conversations with legal to say, you know, this is feeling a bit pressurised now. We're pushing through these gateways and we're not meeting the thresholds. And we had discussions throughout that period of time. So again, I hope I've answered that question for you. Yeah.
Just a bit of, I guess, a bit of context around those gateways, and certainly around the payroll parallel running. You know, the thresholds that we needed to be getting through to those late stages were 99% and no more than sort of 5p out. That those, I'm sure Sarah will correct me, I'm not spot on there, but that's the level. Certainly in the late August, September, we were only hitting something like 60%. And it wasn't until October, November time that we started seeing those numbers coming down and being more like 90%. So the direction of travel really picked up. And I think that's one of the things that made those decisions at that time quite difficult. But you couldn't make that decision on a bold assumption that you were going to suddenly hit the 99%. So it was very clear for us as a project that it wouldn't be inappropriate to hit the go live budget for the November, and then quite clearly because of timings over Christmas and the New Year, December and January were very definitely not feasible either.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Goodjohn, are you okay with those responses?
Yeah, I'll let. I think Councillor Johnson wants to come in, so I'll let others go for now.
Thank you. Okay, do we have, Councillor Johnson.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give everyone a moment to put their headphones on. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, for his questions there. I was going to raise something similar about the use of the legal services that we have in the council, but the truth is I'd like to go back to the beginning of this process, because I think we've got enough detail within the report, the lessons learned, but with inspiration from the leader in her response earlier, I'd like to go back to what the roots are of this work. And transparency, I don't know, after all of this, an hour and a half of conversation, I still don't understand how we, or how the council, perhaps isn't right in this case, how the council made the decision to forge ahead with this work without considering everything in detail, and the lack of transparency in sharing this with councillors. So I'd like to understand better what exactly the process was in 2020 to forge ahead with this work, who agreed to do this, which departments, how was the process going to develop the business plan, and who gave confirmation and agreement for this to happen. And the reason I ask is because this paper does include a number of background papers to give us a list of reports to Cabinet for us to be able to see the history. And in this report, there are 3 reports. There's a mention about the emergency, if emergency is the word, the emergency in 2020. Now, this was part of the Cabinet paper in the end of July, just as we got to summer recess. 2 months later, there was a report. So if I can just quote, just states to us,
System can be implemented on 1st August 2022 to minimise further delay and mitigate the risk and additional cost with running both the Oracle Fusion Cloud system and the current R12 ERP Oracle system.
So from opposition party councillor perspective, if there's a piece saying that in a fortnight this will be realised and there's no reason to raise questions, there's no mention about the money or the reasons for delay, this is just something that happens using the powers of the chief executive, and then 2 months later we hear the figures for the first time, where we can see how much overspend is there, and discussing that paper, because this came through the revenue report, which came the following month. We asked for the report which has come to us, but these are 2 reports before the more recent emergency powers which are there. So there was no conversation, as far as I remember at least, about this work before summer 2022. So what exactly was the sign-off process? There was a question about what Cabinet thought. What did SLT think? Am I chasing shadows, asking for the paper trail because it hasn't appeared in the report? And the work which is here in terms of all of the lessons learned is all a start, in my opinion, after the decisions were made and after we realised there was a lack of capacity from teams in terms of what they were expecting from the system and a lack of staffing capacity. But how did we arrive at that point in the first place? Who made the decision to forge ahead with this work? Who didn't do the scrutiny to make sure there was enough there? Because that's what's missing from this report. I understand that this is about lessons learned, but one of the lessons to learn is transparency in terms of preparations for work of this type. I understand it's difficult for us to address in the chamber to discuss the budget, especially when we go into discussions about the budget. But for me, this has all been hidden. I want to know, where is the paper trail for me to be able to understand what happened at the beginning of this, because it hasn't appeared in these background papers which are before us this afternoon. Just 2 points quickly. Of course, the Governments and Ordnance Committee is meeting shortly. I don't know if it's too short notice to send a report to them, or if we would wait to the next meeting of that committee. If this committee here agrees to send it to them. But again, I would just like to follow up some of the valid points by Councillor John. What exactly is the trigger for our legal services taking part in matters of this type? I understand that this perhaps would be different as part of an ARDAL or area or regional plan, but what is the trigger? And is there a real reason why they weren't part of this? And I understand that there were shortcomings in terms of understanding the risk which related to the project, but I still don't understand why there was a lack of understanding about the risk on something of this scale when something hadn't happened like this for a decade. Why nobody realised all of the possible difficulties that could arise. If we could have an understanding of the first steps which led to it, because I think these were where a lot of the mistakes occurred. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. I appreciate, Matt, this was a couple of years ago you weren't with us. Are you able to provide a little bit more information on the background to where this all started? Who agreed the business case, which department, as Councillor Johnson has requested?
I was just going to come in on the question of the emergency powers and the Cabinet report. The April 22 emergency power that then was reported through to Cabinet in July, and the subsequent Cabinet report in the September. I joined the council in April, and at that point, from that point on, jointly sponsored the project with Tracy. The need for the EP at that time was in my view a right use of the emergency powers, and we needed to regulise the commitments that the project was already entering into at that point, so that I could close the accounts down in the full knowledge that there were the necessary approvals for the spend in the accounts. We very much then, with the work of the project manager, recognised the challenges, and I think it's fair to say over the summer months. Certainly, he recognised the level of some of the foundation work that hadn't been suitably done, and we'd committed to doing an early cabinet report. It came a little bit later than I'd have hoped, because certainly the project timescales and the estimates of the potential costs were moving, and it took until the time in that report for us to get a really good, clear handle of where the project was. It has been it's been a very challenging project to manage, and I don't need to say that. It's all apparent here, isn't it? But I guess some of the lessons learned report also answers your subsequent question around the what time you bring in legal and the quality of the business case. And the independent report talks about understanding when you're delivering a risk project, that this clearly was. And it's very clear that at the outset of the project, it wasn't properly recognised as being a high-risk project. And for that reason, some of the essential resource that you would bring into such a project going forward wasn't engaged with. I don't know if Tom wanted to add to that.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, Councillor Johnson, for the question. Just to add a little bit to what Matt had said, and I wanted to provide some reassurance around. We were regularly reporting, as Tracy mentioned, the project to the council's SLT, and the head of legal services sits as part of that team. And once the issues were arising, my colleagues in legal services were very heavily involved in the project throughout, and I'll bring Victoria in a second, because she can explain how that team become involved in projects of this nature. And I think, as Matt says, the important lesson here for us as a team is to make sure that when we have got those kind of high risk projects right at that very inception, that our legal colleagues are brought in as they were around the contractual arrangements to begin with, but then that they're kept as part of that project team throughout. But perhaps, Victoria, if you could come in terms of just a little bit more detail on how that works in practice.
Yes, thank you, Tom. In relation, thank you, Councillor Johnson, for the question. In relation to the specific legal involvement and how that arose, legal services, in-house legal services, weren't involved during the procurement process, but you have to remember that this was a call-off contract between the council and the Evolutionary Systems Company Limited, as it was known at that time. The ongoing involvement thereafter would have arisen at the point at which it was beginning to be identified, and I think that was around July, August 2022. It was beginning to be identified that there were issues, and our in-house lawyer, who had been involved in finalising the call-off contract agreement for the officers who were instructing us at that time, was asked to consider the terms and conditions of the agreement and provide advice and support at that point. The ongoing involvement then continued throughout until late in 2022, and at that stage it was becoming clear that we would require specialist legal advice from a firm of solicitors who had experience and knowledge and were specialists in this field. We did not have that resource, expertise and knowledge in-house, and that of itself, if we had tried to identify such a resource, would have been a risk in itself. So that involvement then continued throughout the period through to go live and beyond, when we then advised both internally and sought advice from external solicitors around the commercial contract dispute which had arisen, and which we successfully went on to settle very soon after go live.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, do you want to come back in?
If I may, very briefly, it's. I'm just going to do. I'm going to do this in English. So I'm going to be very brief. Sorry. Fundamentally, I believe that councillors have been kept in the dark over this. I don't believe this has been transparently provided information to us. As a group leader, as a long-term member of the council, I believe that we should have been kept aware of this and clarity provided on this. We have overspent by 3.5 times the amount originally budgeted. We've had a 3-line report in July 2022. We had some greater information provided in September 2022, and it's taken a further 16 months for us to get to the bottom of this. There must be some way, some better way, that councillors, particularly senior councillors on this committee, on governance and audit, can be told about these things. Because I'm fairly disappointed, and if this sort of thing is being kept away from us, and I appreciate this is probably a huge exception. I appreciate the lines that the line of inquiry that Councillor Carroll was going down earlier, which was very hypothetical. But when something like this does come up, then councillors deserve to know. And being kept in the dark like this, and it's still completely unclear to me what the origins of this project and failure to have that discussion are. You can't expect us not to be suspicious if we don't get told things clearly, honestly. And the fact that this is here now and is very frank, I'm very appreciative of. However, it's taken a very long time to get to this point, and £3.5 million over budget. I'm actually very disappointed, but I'm glad the report is here. Thank you.
You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn. Just to make clear the point that the report should go to governance and audit, it will be going to governance and audit. If it's possible for it to get there for Monday, we'll see if Mark can do that, but it might have to wait till the following month. But it will be going there before it goes onto Cabinet. Does anybody else now have any other questions? Part 1 questions. We will have more questions in part 2, just so you know, where we'll be able to go into a little bit more depth with commercially sensitive information. Councillor Goodjohn.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to finish off on the point being made by Councillor Johnson. I think it's important to note that as part of, say, lesson 57, good record keeping is important. And what that indicates to me is that as part of the process, while this is occurring, as you're describing, that it's becoming all encompassing, I'm unsure how helpful, for example, requesting the minutes of SLT would be, because so much is happening on a day-to-day basis with day-to-day meetings. That's being described as well in the lessons learned, that because there were so many meetings going on with so many different people that were unclear on exactly what was going on in those meetings on a day-to-day basis, that perhaps the full records of exactly what was being said was probably not documented, which is fair because those are work discussions that are happening on an emergency basis. I understand that. So I wonder how much help that would particularly be, but I would hope that SLT is being made fully aware of the situation at all times during this process, which officers seem to attest is what occurred. So perhaps that would be a good idea if, for example, governance and audit cannot receive the report straight away, which would be good if they can do it as an urgent item, then to request minutes of SLT that discussed Oracle, particularly, any vital minutes of when decisions were made or contemplated would be good to see. So I wonder if that's possible, if there's any comment that could be made on that now.
Thank you, Councillor Goodjohn, and also I can maybe address part of Councillor Johnson's remarks as well. Certainly, I can undertake to go back and have a look for the SLT minutes pertaining to discussions around Oracle. That's not a problem to do at all. And I'll have a conversation with Democratic colleagues after this meeting about the timing of whether we can get this item onto Monday's Governance and Audit Committee agenda, and whether the chair feels that there's capacity on that agenda to take it. Certainly the emergency powers and cabinet reports, just to provide absolute assurance, I can let you know, have certainly were discussed at senior leadership team, and then very regular discussions. I think it's important as well to provide you with some assurance that the project team, so Tracy and Matt have discussed or described the arrangements for their co-sponsoring of the project. The project team itself has got very well-established records relating to the key decisions. The project manager was fastidious in ensuring that they had the appropriate level of approval for certain sign-off, so we can certainly do that. And Councillor Johnson, in relation to the point that you made around ensuring elected members, and certainly senior elected members, are kept appraised of these kind of issues. I know Gemma mentioned earlier around the information that is contained in capital monitoring reports, and obviously the revenue monitoring reports. I wonder, for transparency, and we have a session of SLT with Cabinet tomorrow talking about the next phase of delivering our change programme, and how an important part of that is how we report it to elected members. I wonder if perhaps, if you would find it useful, we can certainly include in that discussion whether there's some kind of, certainly around digital, that we give a regular report in terms of major digital projects, and then perhaps as part of the non-digital but projects relating to significant change, that we make sure that there's a mechanism for keeping elected members apprised of what they're intended to deliver, and indeed whether they're on course to deliver or not, so that information is very explicitly made available to you on a proactive basis.
Thank you, Tom, for that. Okay, we've had quite a good discussion for nearly 2 hours on this particular section. Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, can I ask one further question?
Of
course.
I
will be brief.
Of course. Of course.
So briefly, bearing in mind this was a call-in contract, call-in contract, would you think that this would have been done better had it gone out to tender? And I say that because effectively you've put in a new system. So I just think maybe it might have been a better idea.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Before I pass this on, I'll just clarify. It's a call-off contract from a Crown Commercial Services framework, which is an IT specialist framework. From my understanding, they used it in a mini competition capacity. So there were a couple of suppliers that they evaluated before they chose their preferred option. So it's not an open competition, but there was a competition. But let me hand you back to one of the officers to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Prothero makes a really good point. There was competition in order for the companies that we then evaluated to be on that call-off contract. I truly can't answer your question in full. I don't know if we'd gone out to tender, would we have had more than those 3 tenderers? I think it is quite a specialist market, so chances are probably not. I think from the lessons learned report, the important aspect of this is around the schedule of works. Being a call-off contract, it doesn't give the council any flexibility around the terms and conditions of the contract, that they are as they are. But certainly there should have been greater clarity about the actual schedule of works and some of the specifics around what was going to be delivered.
Thank you, Matt. And that indeed is the biggest issue here. It was that the statement of requirement, the who does what when, that seems to have been missing, shall we say. So there were assumptions made on both sides, and no clarity. I mean, the purpose of these specialist frameworks for public sector bodies is to provide a security, to be honest, because they're that first part of the exercise, which is where you look at the capacity and the capability, the technical expertise. It's supposedly already been done for you, and so it's supposed to take a bit of the risk out of doing an open competition where you've got to be really, I think, clearer where it comes to your specification, and your deal breakers, and what are things that have to be there, or you'll end up with far more suppliers, shall we say, who actually couldn't do this work. It's a tall order for the authority. Appreciate in this case things haven't been quite so smooth and gone quite so smoothly as one would have hoped, but you know, theoretically using these frameworks is supposed to protect the authority. Anyway, Councillor Haynes, do you want to ask any more questions on that matter, or are you okay with that response? Come back. Yeah.
I'm happy with that response, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if there aren't any other questions on this particular section, we are going to part 2, and you will have an opportunity to dig a little bit more deeply into the more commercially sensitive issues and questions, and also the breakdown of the costings. So if we are all happy and content to move on to the next section of this meeting, I would like to move, if that's possible. We are recommending. Sorry, Mark. Yeah.
No, sorry, Chair. I was going to mention, obviously, we address the recommendations part 1 first.
Yes.
But obviously, you can do that now. Sorry.
Yes. You know, we move on recommendation that the report and our comments are referred to governance and audit forthwith, if that's possible for Monday. I understand you need to check whether that is with the chair of governance and audit, because we are asking for this to be an urgent item, and therefore after it will be passed on to cabinet with our comments. Can I have a hand to move if we're happy with that? Thank you, Councillor Lovelock Edwards. Councillor Johnson, are you seconding, or are you? Yeah.
Yes, just second.
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks ever so much. Okay, let's. Next item then were items which the chair's decided are urgent for this particular section. There aren't any. Part 2. So this is the bit where we have to say goodbye to public and press exclusion in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act of 1972. So if Mark, you let me know when we have said goodbye, and I'll move on.
Yeah, we're just working on ending the stream now for public and consumption, Chair, okay? I'll let you know when this is done.